Before the poster and the headline, there was a boy beneath pines. Patrick Floyd Jarvis Garrett, Pat, was born in 1850 by most reckonings, Chambers County, Alabama. Red soil, church bells, chores that begin as soon as the rooster remembers its job. A father with plans that didn't always match the weather. A mother who knew the ledger of a farm better than the men who read it aloud. Brothers and sisters learning the arithmetic of drought and surplus in the same year. The Civil Warriors complicated even small lives. When the dust settled, families scattered like seed tossed ahead of a storm. Beards moved west Louisiana bottoms, then Texas country where the horizon promised work and kept its promise daily. Pat grew tall and lean, a frame that made coats look borrowed. He learned cattle and long miles. He learned to say little because words cost water on the trail and a man needs both. Buffalo country called, the great mid-continent sea where wind travels with no fences to argue it. Pat hunted for a spell like so many men who were young at the wrong moment to be scholars and the right moment to be tired. He learned the patience of waiting for herds to show themselves, and the quickness of finishing a job clean. He was not a boasting kind. He was a measuring kind. He weighed distances. He weighed men. He weighed himself each evening against the day and preferred the numbers to be plain. New Mexico territory tugged next, Fort Sumner country, Pecos River bending like a long thought. Pat tended bar for a time, ranched a little, made friends who liked how quiet sat on him. He married, then grief visited early. 2 wives in the 1870s, the first lost to illness, the second buried before the decade turned. Laws is a teacher that seldom minds its manners. Pat learned to stand up after it anyway. The Lincoln County War burned through the region like a fever. By the time the worst of it cooled, people were hungry for an officer who would hold a star like a tool rather than a costume. Pat looked the part and, more importantly, behaved it. In 1880, he stood for sheriff of Lincoln County. Voters knew his long face and steady eye from corrals and court days. They chose him sheriff to be with the federal deputy as papers, to extend his reach where county lines pretended to be fences for trouble that never respected fences. There was a name floating through all these rooms already, Billy the Kid, smiling, slippery, gifted with languages and escapes, a friend to some, problem for many. Pat knew him by nod and rumor, by drink shared in easier seasons, by the sound a door makes when a wanted man leaves it open a second longer than necessary. Territory placed a task in Pat's hands, bring Billy in if you can, end the noise if you must, do it without turning law into theater. He began to ride with men who could hold their breath through long hours. He visited kitchens where whispers knew more geography than maps. He read tracks in dust and faces in lamplight. He approached the work the way he had approached a herd or a barroom, with attention first. What makes a legend's shadow useful at bedtime is the quiet inside it. Pat carried quiet like water. He would need all of it soon enough. Election day dust, a pause's pace, and stinking springs at dawn. Votes counted, a badge pinned, warrants folded neatly in a vest. December cold, a door opening on the gray light. A badge is a promise you wear on the outside. Pat wore his without ornament. Late 1880, ranchers, merchants, and mothers wanted Lincoln County to breathe again. Pat answered by writing. No speeches, just miles. He gathered a posse that could be trusted not to guess out loud. Barney Mason, Charlie Siringo would write later about similar men, but in this season it was Tom Emery, Charlie Crawford, Frank Stewart, and others whose names survived mostly in the gratitude of quiet nights. They followed stories as one follows a creek not straight but toward a source. At Fort Sumner he missed Billy. By heartbeats and learned what every hunter learns, that luck carries a clock. He reset his own. On December 19th to 23rd, days sliding together in cold. Word pointed to an adobe clutch of buildings near a bitter spring, whose name did not recommend it, Stinking Springs. Pat placed his men in the dark before dawn the way a chess player sets pieces. When the board still thinks it is a table, a door opened. A figure stepped out toward the well, bundled against cold, carrying that careless confidence dawn sometimes lends. A shot cracked, pours down. Pandemonium for a blink, then order again because Pat liked order and the morning was learning his preferences. Inside, Billy and his companions argued in low voices with fate. Pat called out plain terms, steady tone. He could be patient. Cold helps patience. So does knowing you have the angles. To parley that tasted like the last of the coffee, the door opened to surrender. Billy stepped into custody with a half-smile that looked like either resignation or rehearsal for the next escape. Both read correctly. His companions followed, faces a little older than they had been the day before. Pat did not boast. He did good paperwork. He moved the prisoners with care because mobs are as dangerous as legends and less predictable. In Las Vegas, New Mexico, and later at Missoula, reporters leaned forward. Photographers adjusted light. Pat stood tall and said little. He had done the first half of the job. The courts would attempt the second. A jury heard the Brady case and rendered its taut sentence. Hang in Lincoln, dates whispered, rope whispered back. Pat went out other duties like a man with more than one line on his job description. Deputies Bell and Ollinger watched the prisoner when the sheriff could not. The old courthouse in Lincoln held history like a haunted guitar holds songs. The spring of 1881 arrived with a blue sky that didn't care for human calendar. Billy polished his chance in secret and found a moment men would discuss for a century. Stairs, a move, a stolen shotgun, to shots, a town blinking, a horse leaving under a boy with no boots on. Pat rode back into Lincoln on a bell that had already rung. He looked at the scuffed boards, at the expressions on faces that would never be still again, and felt his task become a duty with a sharper edge. Fort Sumner again, footsteps in a dark room and a question in Spanish. A July heat, a friend's house. Quiet east, silence that would not stop echoing. July at Fort Sumner carries cottonwood shade like a blessing. Maxwell Ranch House breathed quietly at night. Thick walls, thin curtains, voices kept low out of courtesy to heat. Pat Garrett rode in with two deputies, John Poe, Gib McKinney, men who could keep their nerves from making noise. Rumors said Billy was near. Rumors sometimes lies. Pat moved as if it were telling the truth this time. They waited in Pete Maxwell's room, Pete half awake, questions more polite than urgent. The bedside the way old furniture does when asked to hold history for an hour. From the yard came footsteps, bare as a boy's. A knife glinted because meat had been sliced in the kitchen where Billy was helpful. Pistol wasn't in hand because hands can't hold everything. The figure paused in the doorway. Spanish like a friendly dog went ahead of him, quiet ease. Who is it? The dark titan. Shots. One will do for the telling. Billy fell. No cheers, no victory tune. Just breathing in a small room and a candle's idea of light. Pat stepped out into summer that suddenly felt colder. He spoke to the deputies in sentences short enough not to break. He told Maxwell what needed telling and left unsaid what no words would fix. Morning made the country formal. Coffin, priest, friends with faces like empty chairs. The grave came because the sun demanded it. News rode the rails. Papers sharpened pencils. Some called Pat a hero. Some called him worse. He did not argue with headlines because headlines do not learn from argument. What he did was right. With the help of his friend Ash Upson, he set down the authentic life of Billy. The kid, not perfect, not disinterested, but an attempt to tether rumor to pages before rumor wandered off entirely. He earned a notch of peace from that effort and a purse raised by neighbors who preferred sober men to noisy ones. He also earned lifelong second-guessing, which is the price public men pay when they make private decisions in a hurry with a room watching. Pat did not gloat. He went home to ranch work and the bruising mathematics of water and debt. He married Apollinaria Gutierrez. Apollinaria would keep house and heart in a partnership that made the long years bearable. Children set dishes at a table where stories were not forbidden but were not the main course either. The territory moved on, so did the law, but Pat's road had more chapters less famous, more complicated, county lines, lost cases, and a government job on the border, a disappearance no one solved, a desert gunfight that solved nothing neatly, then Washington letters offering a post that paid in paperwork and enemies. Law after legend is unglamorous. Pat wore it anyway. The mid-1890s brought a case that would sit like a stone in New Mexico memory. Colonel Albert Jennings Fountain and his young son vanished on a road after court in Las Cruces. Pat, then sheriff down south, waded into the tango ranch politics, accusations of rustling, men with influence, men with rifles, tracks that let one erase their testimony. Arrests came, Oliver Lee, Jim Gilliland. Others along the edges, then acquittals when juries found shadows more persuasive than witnesses. Pat led a posse into Wild Ewell country once, and traded shots at dawn with silhouettes he could name. A deputy died, a suspect was wounded. Justice drew itself in shock and let rain have it. The case remained unsolved. Families kept their grief tidy because that was what the land taught. Pat kept writing. Politics pushed and pulled. Friends in high places, Theodore Roosevelt among them, had taste for men who had already proved their nerve in rooms without wallpaper. Pat was appointed collector of customs at El Paso around 1901. It was not a badge with romance. It was a desk and a schedule, tariffs, bridges, questions about goods and people moving across a line the river liked to edit. He enforced the rules in a city that preferred exceptions. Importers smiled. Smugglers smiled wider. Pat returned each smile with the same polite firmness. Enemies gathered like clouds over a mountain that had made up its mind long before weather did. Scandals, NIPPED, accusations of laxity from one side, of zeal from the other. When Washington changed its mind, as Washington often does, Pat's appointment ended. He had done the job and lost it with the kind of dignity that carries forward quietly even when newspapers donned T-print dignity. He tried ranching again. He tried deals that looked better in conversation than in ledgers. Friends remained. Money did not always. In these later years, his tall frame carried a little more wear. He still rode like a man who trusted horses more than trains for certain kinds of journeys. He still spoke little and measured a lot. Oregon Mountain Road, shots in the creosote, and the ledger we keep. A lease dispute, a goat herd, a trigger man the court named and the rumors replaced, a funeral where even enemies took off hats. February 29, 1908, a leap day for calendars, a regular day for men with errands outside Las Cruces. The dessert looks indifferent as always, mesquite, open sky. Tracks where wagons drew their own maps. Pat rode with an associate, meaning to settle a lease dispute tangled with grazing goats and the friction of neighbors whose patience had frayed. Names in the mix: Wayne Brazel, Jim Miller, rumored by some along the margins. Men who preferred to be near drama even when they pretended to dislike it. On the road, words were exchanged. Accounts never match exactly because echoes edit. Pistols appeared, shots. Pat fell from the buggy into dust that never volunteered to remember blood but always does. Brazel surrendered promptly and claimed self-defense. A jury heard a version of the dessert that made acquittal plausible. Rumors kept other versions alive, hired guns, ambushes, old grudges collecting interest. History kept its counsel and let the official record stand beside the whispers as if both were guests at a difficult dinner, funeral, hats off, faces older than the year before, older than they had planned to be so soon. Polinaria managed the business of grief with the same competence he had brought to meals and bills. Children learned the formalities no child should have to learn easily. What remains of Pat Garrett that helps us sleep? The measure, the way he held work steady without theatrics. A tall figure who believed order was a kindness a community could give itself. If someone volunteered to be the hinge on the door, he did not talk much. He wrote when necessary. He made a famous decision in a dark room that summer. He made less famous decisions for years and years that helped strangers get home at night without thinking to say thank you. In our long, braided story of the West, Pat stands beside Billy in memory because that is how the tale needed to balance. But he also stands beside other lawmen and other problems. Fountains Road, border paperwork, small town quarrels quietly de-escalated by a man with attention to spare. If we are gentle, we can hold the whole picture. A hunter who learned patience, a sheriff who preferred surrender to gunfire and proof to rumor, a public servant who took a difficult job and left it without bitterness when the wind changed. We set his head back on its peg now and stepped softly to the next frame in our gallery. Because the West did not rest after Billy and Pat. Rails and banks and bravado produced new experiments in headline math. Young men with family names everyone would learn tried to rob a town in daylight and learn what a town can do when it is tired of being a backdrop. The Dalton Gang, Coffeeville, Pinkertons again on the wire. A cautionary chapter with a lot of noise at noon and a lot of silence by evening. We will tell it. Next in 5 calm parts so your listeners can travel a hard day slowly and sleep anyway.